Good morning and welcome to the Circular Economy in the Construction Sector webinar. I'm your host, Douglas Morrison. I'm the Director of Operations and Future Skills at Construction Scotland Innovation Centre. And we are Scotland's national centre for innovation in the construction and the built environment. So if you've not already engaged with us, then please do get in touch or visit our website at www.cs-ic.org. I'm joined today by our panellists who have all made and continue to make a significant contribution to promoting and embedding circular practices within the construction industry. As we progress throughout the session, we'll hear from educator Tom Whittam from City of Glasgow College, and Tom will be sharing details of the work that he has been doing to support fellow educators to embrace circular within their teaching. We'll also hear from Fiona Craig from ZWS Scotland, and Fiona has had an absolutely critical role in supporting advances within the skills system in relation to the circular economy. We'll then move on to our first panel session where we'll welcome Andy Pollock from City of Glasgow College. Andy is responsible for the largest vocational, technical and professional construction department in Scotland. We'll hear from Stephen Boyle, again from ZWS Scotland, and Stephen has been championing the pursuit of circular and net zero practices within the construction industry. And finally, we'll hear from Cheryl McCulloch, and Cheryl herself is championing wider engagement in circular practices with industry partners from all sectors through her work with Circular Glasgow. So I'm sure that you'll agree that we have a fabulous lineup, and I'm certainly looking forward to engaging with and hearing from their contributions. And before I hand over and formally start the webinar, I do want to go over a couple of housekeeping points. The first of which is that to ask a question, you can click on the questions panel within your control panel, type your question in and press send, and colleagues in the webinar will try and answer as many of them as we can. There will also be several poll questions throughout the webinar. They'll pop up on your screen. You'll have around 30 seconds to respond. Please do answer them. It's a really interesting opportunity for us to hear insights from you. And indeed, your feedback more generally is extremely valuable. So we will take all questions and comments coming through the chat panels on board, even if we don't have time to answer them all. So without further ado, I'd like to launch into our very first poll, which should hopefully appear on your screen any moment now. And we're asking, on a scale of 1 to 5, what is your level of knowledge of the circular economy in the construction sector? With 1 being no knowledge, 5 being expert, and 3 being somewhere in between. So we'll leave this open just for another 15 seconds or so. That's really important. We will return to this question towards the end of the session and see just what impact this session has had. Okay, so we're closing it down, and hopefully the results should come in. So we see a good spread. Now we've got no experts with us today. Hopefully that's something we're all striving towards. But you can see from the results on your screen that the majority of participants today are in the mid to the low range. So again, hopefully we can support your journey in moving up that scale. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank you all for coming along today. It's my great pleasure to hand over to Fiona Craig from ZWS Scotland. Fiona will introduce the Circular Economy in Construction project. So over to you, Fiona.
Hi Douglas, thank you very much for your warm welcome, and also for hosting this session, this webinar this morning. Okay, so first of all, welcome everybody to this session on construction and the circular economy. I want to tell you a little bit about the work of Zero Waste Scotland and a little bit about circular economy. So the polls suggest that not everybody is familiar with that, as well as a partnership project that City of Glasgow College, Glasgow Caledonian University and Zero Waste Scotland work together on, and which we're going to show you the outputs from that in a minute. But first of all, in relation to Zero Waste Scotland, basically 4/5 of Scotland's carbon footprint comes from products and materials, and the production, consumption and waste of these products and materials are heating the earth at an alarming rate, and this includes the energy required to make, process and transport them, whether that they're made here in Scotland or elsewhere. So for Zero Waste Scotland, this means that we're leading Scotland to use products and resources responsibly as part of a circular economy. And the circular economy is one in which products, services, systems, materials, resources are designed to maximise the value of the resources and minimise waste. So what we want is for products to last longer when they're reused, repaired, remanufactured, reconstructed or recycled. And this is outlined in Scottish Government's Making Things Last strategy, which was published in 2016. So for there to be a true circular economy, there shouldn't be there should be zero waste. Just trying to move on my slides, there we go. So in terms of Zero Waste Scotland, we have 4 key outcomes in relation to what we've just described, and these have social as well as economic, as well as environmental benefits. So it's about responsible consumption, it's about responsible production, maximising value from energy and waste, and our 4th one is more internal to Zero Waste Scotland and about making us agile and adapt us to be able to deliver on this agenda. The transition to a circular economy and achieving net zero by 2045 will reshape how society works and what type of work is required. And driving circular economy solutions will require businesses to work in new ways, develop new skills, adapt to different kinds of mindset and behaviour, particularly within industry, and we have to, I think, become more flexible across organisational and professional boundaries. Myself and some other colleagues at Zero Waste Scotland have we've just published a research report on the future of work, and it's the first baseline employment analysis and skills pathways for circular economy that's been done in Scotland. So it's quite a benchmark piece of work. We just published it in October 2020. And within it, we examined the roles and the skills required to power a national circular economy. And we identified areas of development across 3 value chains. Now, the reason I'm telling you this is that the construction and built environment was one of those value chains. And this is available on our website, both a full and summary report. And what we identified was that nearly 1 in 10 jobs relate to circular economy in Scotland, and there are some regional differences, but we need 10 out of 10, if you like, for the future. And that we need to support investment in skills and education to drive the circular economy transition in Scotland. And I would urge you to have a look, go on our website, have a look. We'll send the link round at this report, because within the construction and built environment value chain that we looked at, I think you'll find it quite interesting in relation to the opportunities that we think are there within this landscape, and also the associated skills and perhaps different types of job roles that we will need in the future. For example, material scouts, where we need to ensure that people are able to source materials locally that aren't necessarily raw materials, and that we are reusing and repurposing materials even within the construction and built environment landscape. So a successful transition to net zero circular economy will depend on both the skills available and how the skills are needed, and how we develop the labour market. And that leads me to the project that I mentioned earlier, Glasgow Caledonian University, City of Glasgow College and ourselves. What we did was we worked together to co-design some materials that would help build capacity of lecturers in this case, but I'll come on to that in a minute. Not just lecturers, but we want to also build capacity of industry. But to understand what circular construction is, yes, there is lots of waste, if you like, in the construction industry, but there's actually other things that we can do to build circular models around the principles and practice. And what we did was create a suite of materials that we can embed into teaching or training. So we've just revised those materials, and we're going to share these with you today. And in a moment, I'm going to hand over to Tom, who's going to tell you a little bit about them. But if you're a training provider, if you are in industry, if you're a small company, a large company, then we are more than happy for you to access these materials, use these materials, they're open source materials, and build these into your training for staff, for vocational learners, for university students, and so on. So we're really pleased to be given the opportunity to tell you a little bit about them today. And as I say, we've got the slides, and we'll circulate the links later. But I'm going to stop talking and hand over to Tom with them, who was key in helping to design these materials. And I'll hand over to Tom. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Fiona. Thanks for that. I will briefly introduce the video that you're about to see, which is an overview video outlining the materials that we prepared. So around 18 months ago, I was asked to get involved with the project, which, as Fiona mentioned, was a collaboration between Zero Waste Scotland and the City of Glasgow College and Cali Uni as well. And the challenge for us was creating educational materials on the subject of the circular economy and construction. At the time, in all honesty, I had very little knowledge about the circular economy and what it meant. So in terms of our poll earlier on, I was probably numbers 1 or 2 at the time. And my task was basically to be the layperson who looked into the subject, tried to build a bit of knowledge on it, understand then how best to present the notion of the circular economy from first principles to a construction focused audience. And at first this was for our students, but it certainly applies to a wider audience to introduce anybody in construction to the term the circular economy. So what followed then was a hugely interesting process of dialogue between ourselves at the City of Glasgow College, at Cali Uni, and of course Zero Waste Scotland, which resulted in the production of a series of slideshows and workshops, a summary of which you're about to see. The video that follows is an overview. So it's an overview of the materials that we put together, and it's intended to educate, get you thinking about how to educate others as well in the subject of the circular economy. Within the materials, we look at definitions of terminology, we look at shocking statistics in relation to waste in construction, and we also look at the barriers and the challenges that are facing us in construction in terms of implementing the circular economy in our industry, and we also then highlight the many opportunities that exist to implement it and act positively. There's also a number of really interesting case studies as well put forward, and there are more in the wider materials, and there's more of everything that you're about to see in the wider materials. So it's definitely worth looking into these wider materials after today's session to get a broader understanding of things. So that's all I'm going to say at the moment. I hope you enjoy the presentation you're about to see and that it piques your interest in some way. Hi, my name's Tom Whittam and I am an architect and lecturer in the Built Environment Department at the City of Glasgow College. This introductory session on the circular economy was set up in collaboration between Zero Waste Scotland, City of Glasgow College and Glasgow Caledonian University. These materials have been put together for lecturers and further education, but they can also be used by anyone who wants to learn about the circular economy for the first time. They have the following aims: to introduce the topic of the circular economy from first principles, to illustrate the importance of the circular economy in construction, to highlight some existing examples of the circular economy in action. For lecturers, the material should encourage you to think about how to incorporate this topic into what you teach. And we also want the materials to motivate and inspire the audience. The structure of the sessions uses 4 slideshows followed by a series of workshops. Session 1 introduces the term circular economy. Session 2 explores how the circular economy concept applies to the construction industry. Session 3 looks at how the circular economy creates opportunities for new business models to emerge. Session 4 provides a summary and useful links to further reading. It should be noted also that this presentation provides an overview only of the prepared resources. It would be beneficial for you to seek out the unabridged information to gain access to the full depth of the package. I will begin by summarising session 1. This is the structure of session 1. It starts by looking at what the circular economy is in broad terms. Then we highlight legislation and policy that's driving us towards a circular economy model. We then highlight why waste in construction is a relevant topic and that we can go well beyond the notion of simply recycling to really make a positive difference. The first thing covered is the definition of the term circular economy. This is put forward in very broad terms initially. To begin to understand the concept, we must first highlight the problems within our current system. This is a system that we call the linear economy. At present, the population of the world is growing rapidly, and our current rate of consumption cannot be sustained. There are due to be 9.7 billion people on the planet in 2050. If we continue to consume resources at current levels, it would require 3 planets worth of resources to sustain this population. This current pattern of consumptive behaviour can be described as being typical of the linear economy. The linear economy uses a take, make, dispose model. Within this model, the focus is on producing and consuming as inexpensively as possible. As this model expands, we need more raw materials and therefore create more waste. It's not a sustainable model, as the world's resources are running out. This model is based on the value of goods depleting successively throughout use and ultimately becoming waste. It could be said that waste keeps the linear economy going, i.e. the sooner we dispose of something, the sooner our demand for a replacement. The circular economy is effectively an antidote to this. In a circular economy, the value of a resource is optimised. The circular economy works on the basis that as the world's natural resources and raw materials run out, they will become progressively more expensive. Thereafter, strategies for optimising resource value or recovering value in existing products will become more economically beneficial. This, in turn, will be beneficial to the environment. For a circular economy to be successful, our attitude to waste must change. Waste must be seen as a resource in order to see a reduction in raw material use. The key to achieving the goals of a circular economy is to embed the principles of waste reduction within design processes at an early stage, and not to see waste simply as something we deal with once it's been created. It's also important to understand that the implementation of the circular economy will also help to deliver targets for the reduction of carbon emissions and embodied carbon. This is something that's reflected in current global and national policy. Beginner audiences may be more familiar with terms like energy efficiency and renewable energy. These are terms that have been within government policy for many years, but we need to emphasise that the circular economy is as important as energy efficiency and renewable energy, and that these topics are all intrinsically linked. For example, reducing carbon emissions is an obvious byproduct of the circular economy. The drive to reduce carbon emissions, develop renewable technologies, and reduce the use of raw materials are all interdependent and mutually beneficial. Our slideshows go into detail about global, European, and UK policy and how they have impacted on one another. We cover global agreements such as the Kyoto Protocol, which is an international treaty adopted in 1997 that acknowledges climate change and that it is extremely likely that human-made CO2 emissions have caused it. We show how this has affected environmental laws in the UK, 80% of which were created by the European Union, who already promote circular practices within their own 2017 Circular Economy Action Plan. We also look at the UK Climate Change Act 2008, which precedes the circular economy concept. The key message in this section is that the development across the UK and wider world is increasingly tied into principles of the circular economy. This will shape the future of which we are all part. It's also worth noting, with the 26th UN Climate Change Conference of Parties being held in Glasgow in 2021, that legislation and policy is constantly evolving on the circular economy topic. The UN recognised that the circular economy is a tool that will help them to achieve sustainable development, and they are exploring how to integrate it more directly into their sustainable development goals. Following discussion of legislation and policy, our sessions then start to focus on the construction industry. We start by asking why the circular economy is an increasingly important topic in construction. The answer to this can be seen in the volume of waste the industry currently produces. Key statistics are presented to highlight the magnitude of the problem. This Zero Waste Scotland diagram from 2017 goes some way to summarising this problem. It breaks the share of waste tonnage in Scotland into sectors. Construction, here represented in yellow, has by far the biggest share. So given the volume of waste for which construction is responsible, it is the sector that provides the biggest opportunity to reduce waste and move the economy in a circular direction. That message is how session 1 concludes. Moving into the second of the 3 core sessions now. These are the 3 topics covered in session 2. Firstly, we look at the waste hierarchy concept. We then look at challenges and barriers in the implementation of the circular economy in construction. And finally, opportunities within the circular economy model for positive change in the industry are explored. At the core of the circular economy in construction is waste reduction. The waste hierarchy model is an environmental waste management tool to illustrate how the reduction of waste should be achieved, particularly with respect to the use of materials. This is something that can benefit the construction industry hugely. This diagram illustrates the waste hierarchy pyramid. It sets out a scale of preference for different circular practices, from prevention of the need to undertake an activity in the first place, through to the least preferable option of disposal or landfill. It's important to understand the differences between each layer of the waste hierarchy, which we explain in more detail. First of all, prevention. This is the most preferable approach within a circular economy. It essentially demands that clients first question whether a new project needs to be built in the first place. Then reuse and repair, which requires that products be retained for their original purpose for as long as possible. Remanufacture looks at recovering, disassembling, repairing and reassembly, resulting in a fresh new product similar to the original. This involves more processing and therefore more energy than repair or reuse. As we move into the least preferable options, it is important to stress that compared to the options in the previous slide, recycling is typically a downgrading process, whilst recovery refers to the recovery of energy or fuel from a resource at the end of its lifespan, for example, through incineration or anaerobic digestion. Finally, disposal, which may be required even if the above processes have all been considered and undertaken properly, but it's to be avoided where possible. The waste hierarchy topic provides many areas of discussion for your audience to engage with. Up to this point, we have set the scene for the circular economy in construction. We then start to look at the barriers that need to be overcome in order to implement the circular economy. In this overview presentation, I will focus solely on one particular challenge. The wider materials cover additional issues. The current linear system treats waste as a reactive byproduct. In construction terms, this means that we only think about how to deal with waste once it's been created on site. This is what we would call a reactive practice. In construction at present, this is likely to mean the segregation of waste on site for recycling. This waste may not always be reusable in the state it is in, as perhaps it wasn't designed to be reused, so materials and resources are likely to lose a significant proportion of their value. The result of this approach is that only the least preferable tiers of the waste hierarchy are achieved. Having presented this and a number of other challenges within the current system, the materials then go on to show how opportunities exist to address these issues within a circular economy. The example we've chosen in this section relates back to the existing problem of only treating waste in a reactive manner. The opportunity actually exists to tackle waste by design. What we mean by this is that within the circular economy, there is an opportunity to consider waste reduction proactively. This means thinking about how to reduce waste from the beginning of a project in order to prevent it occurring further down the line. For example, designing products or components to be easily dismantled and reused. This way of thinking brings in the most preferable tiers of the waste hierarchy pyramid. There are examples of how this has already been achieved in later slides. Following a look at this and a number of other opportunities within the circular economy, session 2 concludes. Now for an overview of the third core session. Within session 3, schools of thought on the subject of the circular economy are discussed. These serve to underline some of the points made in earlier sessions. The Accenture model is one school of thought that we look at in detail, and we then look in greater detail at 5 circular business models. In this overview presentation, we are going to focus on the third topic here and simply present 2 of the 5 business models with case studies to give you a brief insight into how circular economy principles are already being applied. The first business model looks at leasing building products as services. Construction companies or suppliers of products are already looking to expand and enhance revenue, and some are beginning to look at offering additional services like asset management and maintenance. The logical progression of this involves offering building products or complete buildings as services rather than assets that the client owns. Much like music streaming or car leasing, this approach is based on the customer agreeing to provide a continual income stream to the provider in exchange for the upkeep of an agreed quality system or building. This approach incentivizes quality and waste reduction. An existing business that looks at the products as services model is Egg Lighting in Glasgow. Egg have developed a light as a service model whereby they retain ownership of light fittings whilst upgrading them as required for customers over the duration of their contract. This will help to drive quality up for the customer. For example, it is in the interests of Egg to optimise the quality of their service and product in order to reduce the resources required for maintenance. Egg have recognised that only 5% of an LED light fitting needs to be replaced when the light breaks. They are developing upgradable light fittings that allow the remaining 95% of the fitting to be retained. The second business model we will look at involves sharing platforms. The advent of social media has made asset sharing an inevitable next step across all sectors. In construction, a sharing platform could be used to share overcapacity of equipment, services and personnel. Labour, plant or materials can be advertised as available where there is excess or underuse. These excess services could be exchanged or simply purchased. Thus, overcapacity becomes an asset and not waste. GlobeChain is an existing example of how these principles are being applied. It provides an online reuse platform that connects businesses, charities and people to enable them to share and reuse unwanted items. This includes construction tools and equipment. There are further business model examples and case studies to explore within the full package of materials. Session 4 reflects back on the first 3 sessions and asks the audience to consider how materials may be used, the teaching materials that is, to teach others. Within the wider materials, this session also contains a note of potential learning outcomes, specifically aimed at those in further education, as well as links to further reading. This slide is an example of the type of discussion that can be generated at this point in the sessions. Whilst this slide focuses on further education, it can be adapted to question how we can get the circular economy message out to a wider audience and embed it in what we do. To finish off this overview presentation, I'm going to briefly touch on the additional workshops within the wider package of materials. These workshop sessions complement the lecture slideshows. They aim to delve deeper into particular subtopics within the circular economy and provide those using the materials with ideas for engaging tasks to support learning. There are effectively 5 different sessions. Workshop 1 looks at the waste hierarchy model, where waste occurs in construction, and asks learners to consider ways in which waste can be designed out. Workshop 2 asks the audience to consider circular practices that should be part of the selection criteria when clients choose consultants or contractors to work with. Workshop 3A asks students to identify the benefits of prefabrication and modular construction. Workshop 3B shines a light on the huge potential benefits of utilising building information modelling in relation to waste reduction. And finally, Workshop 3C considers building layers and identifies potential improvements in the maintenance and management phases of a building. So, in conclusion, we've looked at the following topics. Session 1 introduced the term circular economy from first principles. Session 2 explored how the circular economy concept applies to the construction industry. Session 3 looks at the circular economy from an economic point of view. Session 4 is a summary slideshow, and of course there is a series of workshops we've just looked at. We're now at the end of this overview, introducing the concept of the circular economy. I want to bring this overview to a close by showing this image of the People's Pavilion in Eindhoven, built by Arup. The project aimed to create a building for the Dutch Design Week in 2017 using 100% borrowed materials, which then had to be dismantled at the end of the festival, with all materials returned to their original suppliers in their original state. It was an exercise in realising a circular building, and I want you to consider that what you see here could be a building at both the beginning and end of its life, having been designed, constructed and dismantled carefully and considerately. This thought is at the core of what the circular economy aims to achieve. And here is a picture of that same building while in use. Thank you for watching.
Well, what a fantastic video, and thank you for Tom for that contribution. I've certainly learned a number of new things having watched it, and great to see some of these case studies coming to life. Now we are going to move into the second poll of the day, and in this poll we're going to be asking what the top 3 drivers for change are, to further embed the circular economy within the construction sector. So we're looking for the top 3. We have carbon reduction or climate change, resource scarcity and resource security, well-being and health, cost saving, and biodiversity loss and natural capital. So this poll will remain open for another 15 seconds, and we're asking you to identify those top 3. Just another couple of seconds and we'll close the poll and have a look at the results. And here we go. So carbon reduction and climate change right at the top of the list there. Resource scarcity, security and cost savings all having a significant impact. And I'm sure that all participants will agree that whilst we have those 3 top drivers, that all 5 certainly play a part in the justification and the case for a circular economy. So we're now going to move on to the first question and answer session. We're joined, as I'd introduced earlier, by Stephen Boyle, Andy Pollock, and Cheryl McCulloch, Tom and Fiona, and we're going to start with Stephen. So Stephen, you are the construction sector manager with Zero Waste Scotland. I know you're doing a huge amount of work in promoting circular economy and net zero within the built environment construction sector. What I wanted to start off with was really looking at, we've heard about the environmental issues, environmental concerns around circular economy, but other than those environmental considerations, what other benefits would a circular economy approach in the Scottish construction sector deliver for Scotland? You seem to have a minor technical issue with Stephen. What I'll suggest is that we move on to the next panelist, and Stephen, if you can have a look at your audio issues, we will come back to you. So we'll move on to Andy Pollock. Andy is the Associate Dean for Construction at City of Glasgow College. And Andy, what I wanted to ask you was really around why City of Glasgow College and the Built Environment team are interested in getting involved in development of this programme in the first instance.
I hope you can hear me okay. Is the sound coming through? Fine? Okay.
Loud and clear.
Thank you very much, obviously, for the opportunity to be here and promote, in the first instance, the project that we were obviously delighted to be involved in. The City of Glasgow Colleges, we've long since been advocates of partnerships and collaboration, so the opportunity for us to come along and work with Glasgow Caledonian University and Zero Waste Scotland was quite an easy decision for us to make, to get involved. But I guess the question in particular is the topic, and why this topic in particular. Climate change and environmental impact is obviously very current, and with Glasgow due to host the climate change conference, albeit delayed, but at some point, it very much felt like the right time to tackle this issue, and the opportunity to tackle this issue with a particular focus in the construction industry was really important to us. I would like to say that we're not naive, but actually once we started kind of drilling into some of the detail and some of the statistics from our industry, we actually discovered we were quite naive. We knew we were huge generators of waste within the sector, but it's some of the things that Fiona and Tom's materials have started to kind of touch upon. It's more than just that kind of waste generation, and it was quite stark. It was quite stark reading for us, and became really obvious that it was a huge part of our responsibility as educators, to make our contribution to that changing of behaviours within our sector. But overall, it's the collaboration, it's the working with other people, bringing together the expertise, being honest and open enough to be able to say that we can't do this on our own.
Fantastic. I think just as an observer, seeing that transfer of knowledge, skills, and expertise between our key public sector agencies, our industry, and our education sector is exactly what we're looking to see. So, I mean, on the note of that collaborative development, kind of perspective, do you see there being further scope for this type of development? And if so, what challenges or barriers do you face in taking it further forward?
There's always huge scope for this type of collaboration, for this subject matter, for other subject matter, with different objectives. This one in particular, obviously, there's incentives there for making that change for our industry and for the whole kind of wider society. The challenges, the obvious challenges, for us and everyone is time and resources. That's the kind of age-old challenge. But again, that's where the whole kind of coming together and the collaboration, we can work together, we can try and share that burden. But there's another kind of wider challenge that we obviously find with creating and developing this type of training programme, and that is getting the industry recognition and getting it the trying not to use a too recognised term, but the accreditation, you know, that basically gives it the kudos that it needs, and that's where we really need to kind of look to our industry. We need to look to some of the participants that are here today to look to our industry to see if they can help us with that recognition and endorsement of this type of product. Our kind of traditional kind of curriculum structure doesn't really allow for the fast-paced change that we now need for this type of development. So we need to find different ways for programmes like this to be recognised and to be endorsed by the industry. And that can be as simple as just, you know, putting your name to it, sharing it on your social media, you know, help us put it out there, recognising it on a candidate's CV at the end of the day. It can be as simple as that. More often than ever, we're now looking towards our industry for a steer and what that modern workforce looks like, how we should be shaping our students for the future. And we're always open for that collaboration, and today welcome any suggestions or any feedback from our industry partners.
Excellent, thank you, Andy. And you know what I'm hearing coming loud and clear through there is collaboration is key. And I think there's an open offer for all participants today to get in touch with Andy, and indeed, you know, colleagues in the education sector. You know, that industry input is absolutely critical to making these programmes fit for purpose. Now, before I go back to Stephen, I do just want to remind all participants that we are looking for questions to put to our panellists. So as we hear contributions during this session, if there's anything further that you would like to ask or like to pose to our panellists, please do capture it in the chat box. So Stephen, I believe your technical issues have now been resolved. We're live, we're ready to go. And again, just going back to the initial question, which was looking at, you know, we recognise the environmental benefits that circular economy brings, but what does this approach, what could this approach bring in relation to wider benefits for Scotland and the Scottish economy?
Yeah, so Tom, sorry about earlier on. Tom has gone through quite a number of the ones around about economic benefits, and when we actually look at you know, circular economy as a society where there is no such thing as waste, where we reuse and repurpose our materials for as long as possible before we reintroduce them back into the natural environment, that means we are creating less waste and we are using less resources. And they all contribute to reductions in costs, which will run onto businesses and therefore create that economic stability within businesses and organisations, reduce their cost. So there are economic benefits very much associated with that. And to get people's understanding of where what the impacts are on waste and resource use that is badly designed, that is badly used, we have done some studies looking at the true cost of waste, and we're actually looking at on sites, looking at what the actual cost is, and you're looking at between £2,000 to £2,500 per tonne of cost for the waste that was in the skips within the waste streams that are coming out of the back end of brand new buildings. Now that's unsustainable. So what we need to do is, if we introduce circular economy approaches similar to the ones that Tom has very eloquently described, we can reduce that, and we can use less resources and generate less waste and therefore reduce cost. And all of those have economic benefits. But looking at the poll, one of the things that no one flagged up as a driver for introducing the circular economy is health and well-being. And one of the approaches and one of the things which we are doing within the circular economy within construction is building better buildings, having ones which are better climately controlled, that breathe better, are in a better environment for us to live in. And one of the other things, one of the concepts of circular economy is using natural products And we know that by using natural products like wood and stone within our buildings, it actually helps with the well-being of the people that are in them. Hospitals, for example, have quadrangles which show the trees and plants within the middle of their hospitals, because greenery, natural materials and plants, they all contribute to greater recovery rates. And that's exactly what you see by using natural materials in buildings. Better buildings that breathe better create less asthma, less health issues, and that has environmental and economic impacts for the country, not only for the people that are using them. And as well as that, for an industrial or commercial location, it is shown to increase productivity. For an educational perspective, greater use of natural materials within the environment that people are learning in actually helps with the learning process and absorbing the information that you're getting, and people can concentrate longer. And all of these studies are out there to help and support it. And these are all part of additional benefits that a circular economy approach can have.
Excellent. So clear message there: social, environmental, economic benefits. Lots of good stuff around the circular economy. Why are we all not doing more faster? From Stephen. So Stephen, just briefly, we've set some fairly ambitious targets around net zero in Scotland. So what can this circular economy approach do to help Scotland not only meet but accelerate the realisation of those targets?
So the overarching one is the climate emergency, where we have a net zero carbon target by 2045. And what does that really mean? It means that all new buildings and buildings that we currently are, of which 80% will be with us in 2045, need to be net zero carbon. And the politicians and everybody are talking there about net zero operational carbon. So that's the carbon that's associated with the electricity and heat that you use on a daily basis within those buildings. But 50% of the lifetime carbon of those buildings is embodied within the materials. So if we use less materials, less resources, and if we use and we generate less waste, then we are reducing the amount of embodied carbon as we move towards a net zero carbon society. But it's also really important to consider these materials that are in our building environment currently, because they are our building materials of the future. Because by 2045, when we want to go and build a new building or do a major retrofit, the materials that we use have to be low embodied carbon if we're going to be net zero. And that isn't raw materials made into new products and materials. That is reused and repurposed materials and products that we currently have, because they have a much reduced embodied carbon than taking them from raw. So as we move towards net zero, the reuse and repurposing of products which does have that embodied carbon reduction will become very, very important.
That's really interesting, Stephen. Thank you. Again, that prolonging of both our built assets, but of the use of products, components, and wider materials, is clearly critical to these ambitions. So I'm going to move over now to Cheryl McCulloch. Now, Cheryl's the Senior Project Manager at Circular Glasgow. And Cheryl, you have the unenviable task of working right across every sector to support circular practices. I know that you do a fabulous job. And the first question I have for you is really just to explore what role does business or industry have in driving the circular economy agenda forward within the construction sector?
Thanks, Douglas, and thanks to everyone for this morning. It's been a great session and a fantastic collaboration across all partners, and from a Chamber of Commerce point of view, who we all work with you all, it's great to see that. So, I mean, I think certainly from our point of view, business has a key role to play in unlocking the circular economy across industry. In the construction sector, I think that some of the points have been touched on already today. Whether that's to help drive the net zero targets, and I know that was one of the kind of main features from the poll. And whilst we're talking 2045, you know, Glasgow itself has a target for 2030. So we like to challenge ourselves even more to make it even harder for us. So I think collaboration is a big part of it. And, you know, I recognise what Andy said around the sort of accreditation, or the sort of the verification of the programmes that this programme. But I think certainly driving the collaboration across the value chain, and actually seeing more of this circular economy principles embedded within that, to really sort of change perceptions and tell the story of what the circular economy is. A big part of what we do is try to educate and raise awareness of all the important benefits, whether it's your social, your health and well-being, your cost savings, is to really try and get that message across there that there is real tangible benefit. And really it's about business leading by example. We want to see these innovations happen in Glasgow, selfishly, but also across Scotland, and really be that exemplar of circular economy principles. So how can we bring that example that you showed in your video, Tom, in terms of Eindhoven, bring those principles to Glasgow and show what is possible? Because when you see the art of the possible, that's when you can make real systemic change happen. And I think business can play a big role in that by actually taking the lead and working with their supply chain and looking at things like net zero and embodied carbon to say, actually, how can we really start to make the difference and embed some real circular principles and thinking within our own organisation.
Thank you, Cheryl. Couldn't agree more. And I think a key feature of the work that Circular Glasgow have been doing is very much around that local regional impact, but naturally with the global reach and influence, so really bringing the learning from right across the world into Glasgow to support our businesses and our industries is a really valuable contribution. Now, what was also interesting to find out more about, we've heard from both Tom and Andy, and indeed Fiona, around the value of skills, the importance of skills in this space, and I just wonder if you had any insights as to how businesses and academia can work more closely to advance our interests within the skills system.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a real opportunity there, and I think there's a real need for this. And I think you just have to look at the statistics, such as 23% of apprentices are in the construction sector. So we need to ensure that the workforce of tomorrow is ready for the jobs of tomorrow, because it's conversations we'll all have had. Apprentices that are building, putting in gas boilers just now will not be doing that in 5, 10, 15 years time. So actually, how do you get them ready for that? So I think there's a real need to try and bring together industry, academia, and really start to look at how we can embed some of these principles in. And I think the work that Fiona and the team at Zero Waste Scotland have done around the report that you've published, there's some great materials in that. But also think programmes like the City of Glasgow College has led on by pulling this together, and actually how can we then bring in some of the additional programmes like the Develop Young Workforce model, and actually really start to try and build some of that industry learning within academia and start to embed those principles much more closely. We've got a huge opportunity around the sort of green recovery and the construction recovery plan through the Green Jobs Fund. How do we start to try and funnel some of this in to industry as well, and start to build some real tangible partnership working across industry and academia, because I think there could be some really brilliant examples come out of that.
No, absolutely, and it's great to hear so many of the publicly funded agencies being referenced in there. I think that connectivity between all of us and the wider industry is really important. And of course that mainstreaming challenge. I think what we have here today is a wonderful example of the products of a really impactful collaboration. The question then becomes, how do we mainstream that into the skill system? And I appreciate those on the webinar today are very well placed to respond to that question. Now I'm going to move on to Tom next. Thank you, Cheryl, again. Before I do it, I just want to remind our audience that we are actively looking for questions. We have 5 experts here today for you to mine their insights and expertise. So please do capture as many questions as possible, and we will look to address them. So Tom, Thank you once again for your video. Absolutely loved it. I thought it was a fantastic contribution, and I'm sure that many of our participants will be sharing it with their networks after the session. But what I wanted to really explore, you made reference to your journey, from that kind of novice to towards expertise, and I just wondered, from the educator's perspective, what's a good starting point when you're looking to engage students, or the wider stakeholder community in the subject of circular economy?
Thanks, Douglas. Yes, engagement with students from our point of view is crucial. For me, I think information is absorbed better when people are interested in a subject area. So for me, the idea of engagement or useful engagement with students or other individuals within the wider industry, it really hinges on motivating learners and inspiring them somehow on the subject. So I think if they feel motivated and inspired, then they're more likely to listen and absorb the information that's coming across to them. So if they have that sense and that feeling, then they feel as though they can be involved in the circular economy, they can make a positive difference. And there is a big positive difference that anyone going into construction can make when you start to look at the circular economy topic. If I reflect back on my own journey that you mentioned there, I suppose I was certainly a learner at the start of this process myself, and the things that grabbed me and engaged me were things like the shocking statistics in relation to waste, when you realise how much better we could be doing. And so then, your ears prick up at that point and you think, right, what can I do to make a difference? Surely there's a lot we can do here. So some of that kind of shock stuff at the start really tell a story about what's going on, I think is quite engaging, and certainly was for me. I think surely we could do better here, and then also think that at the other end of the scale, there's having live case studies and live examples of things that people can see, so the concepts make a lot of sense, and the value of the circular economy concept is undeniable. But then seeing things that exist and are already managing to work and thrive using those principles is great. So those case studies are really important, I think, as well. And if students see these things, I think they start to feel empowered and see that they can be part of something really positive in their future careers.
Excellent, thank you, Tom. And I think that the kind of the passion, the collective ambition, and the relevance that you're bringing to this is clearly evident. So I'm sure that for the educators in our audience, there's many more questions as to how you've managed that journey. The other question I had for you related to any potential barriers that you've faced in getting students or learners introduced in the circular economy.
In terms of in the classroom, so from my side of things, I think having looked into the subject myself, and Stephen touched a bit on this too, the idea that perhaps there's an awareness already of things like renewable technologies and renewable energy, reducing carbon emissions. These phrases are already out there and perhaps better understood, certainly better understood, I think, than the circular economy concept. So potentially a challenge for us is to get people to see that the circular economy is really on the same level as this, and it has a kind of mutual benefit to these other things that we're all working towards, that are already really embedded within policies and things that drive the direction that the industry is going in. So for me, a challenge is getting students to make that connection and feel the importance of the topic, really, and to show it as being side by side with these other things, and the words like sustainability and reducing carbon emissions, that the circular economy is really up there with those things. One thing in particular that I think back to that helped me to see that was the idea that recycling it comes quite far down the scale of preference in the waste hierarchy. And the idea that this is, for me, this was something I thought, is very responsible and very good to do, and it certainly is. But we can be better than this. We can be much better if we look at designing things better to reduce waste at an earlier stage. So yes, getting the circular economy on a par with these other more familiar terms is quite crucial, I think.
Yeah, no, and of course it's it's certainly an educational challenge that extends way beyond the boundaries of the construction sector alone, and really permeates right across our whole society. So I know that others on the panel today are engaging in that wider message, and agree that it's critically important. So thank you again, Tom. Just before I hand over to Fiona, this is the final call for the questions, and before we go into the wider audience Q&A session. I'm now going to hand over to Fiona Craig. Fiona is the Education Skills Manager at Zero Waste Scotland, has been a supporter of this project, and indeed the funder of this project from the very beginning. So Fiona, it's a great privilege to welcome you here this afternoon. And what I wanted to kick us off with is really to explore the skills implications and how colleges in particular can best prepare the future workforce for circular construction.
Thanks very much, Douglas. And we have to recognise your support of all of this project, because in your previous life at the college, then you were a great ambassador around circular construction. In terms of preparing for circular construction, I do think, to go back to what Tom was saying earlier, I do think we need to inspire the young workforce, and actually, to go back to the research that's been mentioned, it's on our website, The Future of Work. I think you will find it's really quite interesting, the types of roles and functions that we think that we will need to develop to make construction more circular. And I think in terms of inspiring young people and inspiring educators of all kinds, whether you're training providers, whether you're working in apprenticeships, whether you're, like Tom, lecturing at the college or universities, or in industry itself, as I said earlier, I think this is really a think piece to get you to realise, gosh, there's change afoot here, and we need to really see what's going to be happening in the future. So maybe to give you some examples of what we're talking about in terms of the construction, when we looked at the research, the three kind of areas that we looked at were off-site construction, we looked at closed loop cycling of building materials, so that's about keeping materials at the highest value for as long as possible in a reusable format, rather than getting into recycling, as Tom was talking about, and the whole kind of digitisation of buildings and material management. So this is all going to need new types of roles, because Douglas, correct me if I'm wrong, but sometimes I think there's a recruitment issue in getting young people into what the traditional construction industry is, and also sometimes I think there's issues maybe for getting some kind of gender balance and so on within construction. So maybe to attract young people, young women, young BAME people, and also just young people that wouldn't normally consider construction as a place to go and work, then maybe have a look at the research and the types of roles we're talking about. For example, we're going to need deconstruction auditors, so people looking at buildings and how best to deconstruct, because we're not going to demolish anymore. We're talking about material scouts, which are people that need to source those local reusable materials locally, and maybe sustainability advisors to look at, well, if you're going to transport reusable materials, is that going to be difficult in terms of it won't outweigh the carbon savings, for example? Procurement is going to be a key factor there, as well as even demolition labourers and technical managers. What else? I'm trying to think. Some of the other ones. Digital skills are key, and that's something I think that the construction industry needs to think about in relation to data analysts, BIM programmers, software engineers, repair operatives. So in terms of off-site construction, we're going to need multi-skilled operatives, technicians, to work alongside perhaps some of the traditional occupations like joiners and so on. So I think, you know, if you do get the chance to look at the research, that will give you a real idea, an indication, because we did go out and talk to industry, Douglas. You know, we went out and we talked to people that are leading the way, that are pioneers, that are saying we need to do things differently. Here's some of the things that we need to do, and here are some of the skills that we need people to have. So it's definitely multi-skilled, digital skills, procurement's key, understanding materials, material use, and understanding net zero. Those are kind of the high level ones, but
yeah, of course.
I think there's inspiration there for young people to think about this as a place to go, and in terms of career pathways and career development. And that's something I think we need to also emphasise is, you know, enabling careers advisors and so on to understand this as well. But I do think there's an awareness raising aspect, and to not see circular economy as some great big kind of mysterious thing. It's actually, it is an economy that has a circular aspect, has environmental and social benefits that people have already highlighted. But I think there's inspiration there for young people, Douglas, to take up that challenge.
Thank you, Fiona. You know, what I'm hearing there is that, you know, it's about an industry modernising, an industry transforming, you know, new jobs, better jobs, attracting a more diverse workforce. So again, more ticks in the box for the circular economy. Now we do have just one more question for you, Fiona, and very briefly, you know, you're obviously very passionate about circular economy and about what this means not only for our society, our environment, but for our developing workforce. And I just wondered, you know, what is it that most excites you in a skills sense about what this could bring?
I think, just as I said, Douglas, that it's not just about the environment. It's actually, there are new jobs here, new types of roles, new opportunities for businesses, and the benefits will be environmental, social, and economic. And for me, it's no longer optional anyway. So we all need to get on board with this, and we need to think differently. People always say think out the box, but think differently. We need to do things differently. We need to be more efficient, and there are benefits for businesses in relation to doing that. And just reduce this really, you know, terrible kind of story, if you like, or narrative that construction has. We can change that in terms of some of the horrendous statistics around, you know, waste. And we can no longer afford as a society to do that. And I think Scotland's up for the challenge. I think the industry's up for the challenge, and there are real opportunities and benefits to be had by everyone. And although I'm emphasising young people, I do think we have an existing workforce that, with a little bit of upskilling or reskilling and understanding and changing behaviour and mindset, then, you know, this is possible, and we need to kind of grasp these opportunities.
No, of course, it's a really important point, Fiona. You know, this is very much, you know, a national, in fact, you know, a global challenge in reskilling, upskilling workforces to embrace these practices. So thank you to all five of our panelists. I'm sure our audience will will agree that your insights have been fascinating, and very much looking forward to moving on to the audience questions. We are now going to shift over to our third poll of the afternoon, which should appear on your screen in just a moment. So what we're asking here is, following today's webinar, how likely are you to discuss the circular economy with your colleagues, students and or peers? And we're asking whether you're very likely to discuss the circular economy, will you possibly discuss the circular economy, or do you have no plans whatsoever to discuss the circular economy? And we'll leave this open just for another few seconds. We'll see the results as they come in. Yeah, I'm absolutely delighted to see that the vast majority of participants are very likely to discuss, and equally as delighted to see that none of our participants are not, or don't have any plans to discuss it at all. So we are now going to move into our Q&A session. There is still the opportunity to post any questions that you have, so please continue to do so. But we will now start working through the questions that we've received to date. The first of which is coming from Finn, and then perhaps we'll pose this question to you, Stephen. So Finn is asking, what do the next steps in a wider rollout of circular economy across the Scottish construction industry look like?
Well, I noticed from one of the other questions as well, it says that, it says common sense. And I think circular economy is a common sense approach for most of these things. But this is the very first step in raising people's awareness and education and about what a change in direction, how change in behaviour can actually drive a better outcome. And I think the two things which I would say is that we need people to understand the true value of materials and products, and to put a real value on them, so that they respect them, treat them correctly, look for quality, and value them for as long as they can without discarding them, and look to see where that material goes in the future and have a real care about that. So it's a change of approach of people and organisations about the materials and products that they use. And also we need to see a step away from looking at CapEx, the cost of doing something now, and really look at the long-term costs, impacts, and put a value on those too. So when we move from just cost of building something or maintaining something, look at the cost of running that and the cost of recovering the materials at the end of their life, but also look at how a different approach can help support reductions in maintenance, how productivity can be increased, learning can be, how and look at the whole benefits of the product that you are making and really put a value on them. And that includes things like reducing the embodied carbon, energy efficiency of a building to meet different targets and environmental targets too. So yeah, that's what we need, that shift.
No, thank you, Stephen. I think it's really interesting to hear that many of these solutions, many of the technologies that we require are already available to us. So I think the kind of common sense reference is just. I would like to take that further. We have a question from Jan, and Jan is asking, the whole concept seems to be common sense. So why do we think our industry has not already adopted some of the principles? I'll perhaps pose that to you, Cheryl, because I know you're doing a lot of work across multiple industries. So, what are the common barriers? What do you think is holding us back?
I think there's a number of factors. I think one of the main ones that we hear a lot about is the procurement, and from a construction point of view, is making sure that the build and developments are procured in the right way, so that it's bringing in circular principles from the outset, from the design, to considering the deconstruction at the other end. You know, at the moment, a lot of it is about the, you know, the race to the bottom of the price aspect. It's about actually trying to kind of pivot the procurement system to then consider the whole life value, and to, you know, as Stephen's touched on already, you know, bring that embodied carbon aspect into the value of it as well. So I think that's certainly one of the barriers, and I think more widely, I think it's making sure that there's that education piece from the outset to make sure that the investment, you know, the clients are looking for these builds on circular principles, that they're seeing the kind of wider value at the outset, that they want to look at how they consider their build, their development, their end of use, and bring in some of that modularity, you know, use of natural materials. So I think they're probably a couple of the main factors at the moment, is making sure that the procurement systems, you know, the most supportive and enabling it can be for circular economy, but also making sure that it's embedded right at the start, you know, from that design process, you know, with the design of the build.
No, absolutely, and you know, the weight of evidence in favour of circular practices has long since overshadowed, you know, perceived barriers. So, you know, that education and wraparound support is, you know, is really critical. So, thank you, Cheryl. I'd like to move on to a question that's came through from Lindsay, and Lindsay is asking, so changes within the industry are frequently driven by client demand. Have any of the panelists seen a shift towards circular economy approach from major clients, both in the public and private sector? I'm going to split that question up. So, Andy, I was wondering if you could give us any insight as to whether you're seeing an increased demand from industry partners for circular economy training, or
There's some anecdotal evidence, but I think probably the key thing there actually is some of what Lindsay asks in her question starts to answer some of the issues that sit within Jan's question sitting there. But from our point of view, the answer I would give to that is that there is obviously some contact from industry, but it's actually going in another direction for us. It's us that seems to be kind of pushing it towards industry, as opposed to industry making that approach towards us. And it is actually one of the challenges that we have, even from our students, students that are in employment, is they question sometimes the value of this because they're not seeing enough examples of this actually happening within their own industry. So that, you know, there's sometimes there's a challenge for us to be able to justify embedding this as heavily as it has to be within the curriculum, because they literally look outside their college buildings, see construction sites going up, and they're just using very, very traditional methods. A lot of these things that Fiona kind of alluded to sit in the background. So there is a bit of an awareness piece there to help that whole kind of sector attractiveness, to understand that a lot of these things that we're discussing, they're not obvious, they're not seen, you know, visibly within construction sites to go on within the background. There are you know, kind of office-based expertise that sit in the background. So there is a lot of work to be done there, you know, around that kind of whole industry awareness and bringing forward with it.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. I think that kind of embryonic demand coming through the skills as tertiary system, you know, we'd certainly hope to see increase as, you know, as adoption is taken forward. Now, Stephen, I know that you're very much there, you know, dealing with industry partners on a daily basis, and providing advice, guidance, and wider support to industry and clients. And what are you seeing? Is there a shift from major clients, you know, across the private and public sector? Is there a difference between the two?
Just building on a little bit that Cheryl said there, yes, there is a shift, small but definite shift. So Cheryl mentioned procurement there, and her answer to the last question, and there is a prioritisation procurement linked into sustainable procurement that the Scottish Government are putting in place, and that asks the questions which hopefully will drive us more towards circular economy. It asks the client, what is important to you? And that's when it brings in those questions about whole life value, maintenance cost, and environmental impacts, and environmental air quality. It brings those questions in, so you then begin to consider different sustainable and circular economy approaches to do that. So that's the Scottish Government doing that. It's not individual businesses. One of the things which you see businesses doing now within the construction sector, a multiplex are one of these businesses where you see greater levels of digitization coming in. And they say model first, some of them say material first approaches. But basically they're using technology like BIM to eliminate snagging, to minimize the amount of resources that they use, to use standard lengths so that there's less cutting, less wastage, less resource use, and therefore and a different approach to how they build buildings. So yes, there are examples and shifts, but unfortunately, and one of the other big shifts is the move to off-site construction, which is by far one of the biggest opportunities to introduce circular economy and the benefits of it in Scotland, especially when we start using wood as the main building product and materials. But yes, so there are shifts, but there's still a big way to go to move us away from digging ditches, building on site, and continue to do what we did 100 years ago.
Yeah, no, indeed, that is, it is more than just a shift in process. It's a cultural challenge, a behavioural and attitudinal challenge that we collectively need to get over together, which I think is the key point in there. And of course, Construction Scotland Innovation Centre, we're very keen to champion off-site and modular construction. So there's an open offer there to our audience, that if you would like to find out more about what we're doing or how we can support you, then please do get in touch. Now, I've got a question here from Joseph, and Joseph is asking, would it be correct to say that if our building standards are aimed at being net zero carbon or even passive house standard, then the construction sector would be achieving and embracing the circular economy idea as a standard practice? And there's a lot in there, so I'm going to again split that question up. Maybe start with Tom. Tom, I know that you've looked at passive house at net zero standards, so we know that they're in there in your research and pulling together this programme. Is it as easy as just setting a standard and expecting everyone to follow? Is there more to that?
I think that's a good question to highlight. I guess the things that we're familiar with and that we're doing already, and how perhaps they're distinct from the circular economy, and that these things that are mentioned, for example, the net zero carbon and the passive house stuff, they have a mutual benefit to the aims of the circular economy, which is my understanding of it. But if we took a passive house, for example, and it was done to passive house standard, and from an energy use point of view, it was fantastic. Has that building been designed to be constructed or deconstructed at the end of its life, and all products recovered properly? So those are the circular economy kind of thoughts, perhaps from a designer's point of view, that you might want to look at. So almost an answer to that question, those things have a mutual benefit to the circular economy, but it's trying to then understand what are these additional things that we're trying to achieve with the circular economy.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really important point, Tom. And these terms, like net zero and passive house, and low carbon and circular, they can be understood synonymously, amongst our stakeholders. And again, just highlighting how important it is to understand what can be fairly subtle differences, and recognising that they're in pursuit of very similar goals, but in and of themselves serve slightly different purposes. Now, Fiona, I'll maybe just come to you to look at the second part of that question, because we've already recognised that we have a number of the tools, the technologies, the processes, the intelligence to be able to make a significant leap, you know, in terms of our pursuit of a circular economy. You know, is there a danger that, you know, we set a standard and, you know, perhaps don't have the workforce to deliver on that standard, or, you know, do we need that thing to work to, and indeed is that thing there?
I think there's probably quite a lot of work to be done, Douglas, in terms of, as I was saying earlier, just awareness raising within the industry, to demystify circular economy. You know, we don't want the language to be a barrier. I do think that we need to think about this at all levels and across all professional boundaries, because circular economy cuts across all those professional boundaries, and we all need to be thinking and be on board with it. So whether we are, you know, at a technician level, a tradesman level, straight up right through to executive leadership, and in terms of embedding this into all training, all curricula, we have set up a circular economy education and skills partnership. And that's exactly what we're trying to do. We're trying not to make it something that's independent and something you've got to come to terms, what's this new thing? It's actually, the vision is that this is everybody's everyday practice and everyday learning. So whether you are a joiner, whether you're an accountant within construction, or whether you're in finance, or, you know, or in any aspect, or whether you're an architect, or something to do with digital technology or data, and that, you know, we all need to be thinking about this and thinking about that life cycle, systems thinking, and designing out waste. So we want to build it into all curricula. We want to think about how we can influence the young workforce coming in through apprenticeships, foundation, graduate, modern, to the existing. What do we need to do to bring the existing workforce up to speed, and how can we enable them to perhaps multi-skill, and also just enable that mindset and behaviour change. So it's not I don't think it's a straightforward thing, but I do think it's achievable. And we do need, at the higher level, we need the executive leadership within this. And we are looking at maybe developing a particular executive leadership module, particularly for the construction sector, that we would be happy to roll out to anybody. And also, please start with these materials. I mean, the reason we're here today is we've created these materials. It's not the be-all and end-all. Tom's and Andy and colleagues have done a fantastic job on them. Please access them. They're there, they're open source. Use them and tell other people about them, and adapt them for your own uses and your own audience. So we do have a bit of a starter here, and I know we're all keen to kind of build on that project and really roll this out, not just to other colleges. That's really important in terms of the vocational educators, but also within industry itself. The other thing I was going to say, Douglas, is I'd love to build on Cheryl's point about how we can link in industry and our educators, and if we have off-site construction sites, and think, you know, can we invite the educators and the students and the apprentices in to see what this looks like, and make it real for people, make it real.
Absolutely. And yeah, I couldn't agree more, Fiona. I think that's something that we should all be aiming to realise as standard practice. And again, another key learning from this project that adds value. Now, unfortunately, that's all the time that we have for questions. I appreciate there are many questions which have remained unanswered. So thank you to all of our participants for posing them. What we will do is take these into account and use them to inform our future sessions. Now, before I close, I do want to move to the final poll of the day, which is a return to our original question. On a scale of 1 to 5, what is your level of knowledge of the circular economy in the construction sector? Are you still at 1 no knowledge, or 2 or 3, or are you moving up towards that expertise at number 5? So what impact has today had on your knowledge, understanding, awareness of circular economy in the construction sector? We'll leave that open just for a few more seconds. And we'll close it off. And yeah, absolutely delighted to see that levels of knowledge, or at very least confidence, are moving up that scale. And that's exactly what we're here to do today. So I'm really pleased to see that our audience has found value in our panelists' contributions. And just to wrap up, I would like, as always, to thank our audience for joining, and more importantly for posing the questions and engaging with our panelists. And thank you also to our panelists for sharing their expertise and insights with us today. You're all genuinely at the forefront of this movement, and I'm sure that our audience will join me in thanking you both for your contribution today and for your contribution more generally. To our audience, once you receive your feedback form, please do take a few minutes to fill it in and give us comments that will help us to improve our future webinars. We're really keen to hear from you, and we hugely appreciate you taking that time. You will find relevant handouts and links are provided in the chat box, as well as a link to the Construction Scotland Innovation Centre website. So please do have a look, get in touch. Thank you all once again for your time today, and have a lovely afternoon.